Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I am one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. Thank you for joining us for our first podcast of 2023, and it's on the Bad Batch episodes 1 and 2 from season 2, Spoils of War and Ruins of War. With me is Thomas Harper. Tom, how are you tonight?
Happy New Year, and it seems really fitting. We're just out of the holidays, and we've been given the gift of new Star Wars. The fact that we have new Star Wars to talk about and break down and analyze a week into the new year is phenomenal. So I can't complain.
Yeah, if you had told 12-year-old me that we were going to have a Star Wars TV show one a quarter, it's like, how can you fathom that? Like, if you've gone through the dark times of the 1990s and you saw Return of the Jedi in the theater in 1983, and then you just had perks of the Droids TV show, the Ewoks cartoon, the Ewoks specials that they did. If your introduction to Star Wars was Caravan of Courage, and then you thought like, well, that's it, we are blessed. So being able to talk about Star Wars that's good is a ton of fun. So let's jump into the beginning of season 2, which seems to be a love letter to Indiana Jones, because there's a lot of homages to Raiders of the Lost Ark and Last Crusade in these two episodes. Tom, did you catch that, or is it just me?
Oh, the whole opening scene, sort of in media res, with it was just almost a direct callback to Raiders. Yeah, I thought it was. I sat there for a second. It was like 4 a.m. when I'm watching this on Wednesday morning, and I was like, "They did that? Of course they did. Why am I even questioning this? Of course they called back to one of the most beloved franchises other than Star Wars in the Lucasfilm profile or portfolio."
Yeah. So yeah, it begins and ends with indie references from, like That's My Snake Reggie to, Let It Go. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, the treasure was you. So it's good stuff. But let's get into the legal issues here, because there are a bunch. So we begin on this tropical beach planet, and our heroes are running away from crabs that are giant. So again, there's kind of the Jules Verne aspect to it, from the sequel to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And instantly I started to think, are those crabs sentient? Because life is all over the map in Star Wars. Is it just a big animal, or is it sentient? And did you get any feel if these things were sentient or just big animals?
Intelligent, yes. Sentient, no, I don't think so. They seem to be really ticked off, but not necessarily like thinking and coordinating action and sort of existing in the way that sentient beings would exist. That definitely affects our legal analysis as far as what the Bad Batch was taking, the force that they were using against the crabs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because if they went to a monastery or a crypt or something to get this box of stuff, if the crabs were an indigenous people and that came from like their temple, that's a huge issue right there, where our heroes are not in the right with what they're doing. However, if it's, the deserted temple, and again, there are different legal issues with if this is something of a cultural significance, but the species that had it is extinct, versus they took it from the crab people. And if they are crab people, or are they just crabs? So, which then gets into the type of force, is self-defense available for fighting giant crabs? And I think the answer to that depends on, is the Bad Batch the aggressors taking something of significance from the crab people? Or if they're just crabs that live there, then they're not the aggressors. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it gave me sort of the parallel to, there's this Clone Wars episode centered on R2 and C3PO, where they end up on this planet with these like tiny little creatures who are ruled by this like slightly less tiny, slightly bigger creature, this little dude called the Big Hezu, and R2 ends up squishing him at the end, like falls over on him, and squishes him. But the episode sort of in general revolves around these sort of mini stories of R2 and C3PO kind of stumbling into these situations with these very primitive species and whatnot. But in each instance, they're sort of some version of sentient, and they have like societal structure, and there's power plays, like all the things that you would see with a normal society. Because you don't see that here, I think with the crabs, I don't know, there seem to be a lot of them. So I don't know if we could classify them as an endangered species, but say they were, say there's a few of them. I think you would have to be careful. And I don't think the Bad Batch ran afoul of any laws protecting endangered species, because they weren't actually killing any. I think they probably wanted to. Maybe they killed one or two, but those things seem pretty toughly armored, and so I don't think they ran afoul of anything on that front.
Well, the Endangered Species Act does allow for self-defense. So like if the endangered bear tries to kill you, you can defend yourself. That doesn't mean you end up as a snack for the bear. So but yeah, this does seem to be like, we have the Marine Mammal Protection Act. I don't know if there's a self-defense clause in there, because it's not like manatees go on killing sprees.
Right.
I mean, it would make
Propellers
Florida
be damned.
It'd be really weird in Florida if manatees started acting like gators and being predators, but but again, you're not supposed to pet a whale, or you're supposed to stay away from the dolphin, and like don't ride the seal. But if the seal decides, has rabies and decides to try to kill you because it's a rabid animal, self-defense, is available.
And I would wonder, I don't know, I'm not an ESA specialist, but in terms of that self-defense provision, whether it works the same as usual self-defense, where you can short circuit, in other words, not be able to use that defense if you are the cause of the need for your own self-defense. If you go provoke the fight, you don't get to use self-defense against another human being. And it seems to me that these crabs were probably living a perfectly normal space crab life on this planet, and then in comes the Marauder and the Bad Batch to take whatever they're going to take there, and stirred up the pot. I wonder if that's it would seem logical if there was that same function in the ESA. Like, you can't go mess with a bunch of grizzly bear cubs and then claim self-defense when you had to kill the grizzly bear. I don't know.
Yeah, that would
there's a lot of layers to that onion.
Yeah, there's a ton of layers to it, and it's like, did it sound like Wrecker caused the problem, which is,
of course,
it happens in this, like, the big dude who likes smashing things. It's like, oh yeah, I stunned the stormtrooper later. It's like, if you hadn't have done that, everything could have gone much smoother. With like, you get out with the crate of jewels and no one's the wiser. But no, yeah. Wrecker is the one that causes that problem. So let's get into the next issue, that Omega's hanging out with Tech. It makes sense that Tech is giving her instructions on quizzing her on different types of Imperial spacecraft and vehicles. And there's an issue of child endangerment that then starts coming up, and that's inherent with her hanging out with mercenaries. So like, do you want the 13-year-old or 14-year-old hanging out with mercenaries? And child endangerment is any person who, under circumstances or conditions likely to produce great bodily harm or death, willfully causes or permits any child to suffer, or inflicts thereon unjustifiable pain, physical pain or mental suffering, or having the care or custody of a child willfully causes or permits the person or health of that child to be injured, or willfully causes or permits that child to be placed in a situation where his or her a person or health is endangered. So she's fishing, catches a crab, which is a rowing term of art, and ends up sliding down the cable with her bare hands. Now, if you've ever worked with wire rope, you know that would shred the hands. So the fact she's not wearing gloves, I know it's a TV show set in space with adventure, but that was one of those things, like, she would be a bloody mess at the beginning. So give her gloves so we can at least pretend she would not get mauled by that wire rope. She falls out of the aircraft. Now, granted, they're under attack by the crabs. Inherently, on being on that mission, it could be considered child endangerment just overall. So, any thoughts on this? You got kids. Do you take them on heists?
It's now this is I want to inject like a classical Star Wars problem in this, because I think it was in the season finale of season 1 where there's this talk of Omega and like how old she is. She's actually older based on their estimates than any of the Bad Batch. So she's still a minor, like under even Star Wars laws. So makes me kind of wonder about the Bad Batch. But yeah, I think her whole sort of existence is like one bit of child endangerment after another. I don't know that necessarily allowing her to fish alone is enough to trigger that rule. So it's the key word there, the key phrase is conditions likely to produce. And other than maybe knowledge of the fauna there, the dangerous native species that she might be exposed to fishing, I don't know that necessarily like letting her out to do that would trigger that. Now, bringing her to the planet, exposing her to this dangerous mission and a line of dangerous missions, yeah, probably that does. So if they're going in there and they know that these crabs exist and that they're really, really dangerous and this is a high stakes mission, even though they leave her at the ship, I think that that could still count as something that could rise to the level of child endangerment.
Even though she's older, like the batch was aged up and trained, and so she's still emotionally a child. So there's that factor. Also, she's fishing with a hoist. Just by the nature of what you're using, that's like trying to fish for a whale. Like it's not, it's like she's not trying to get trout. Like this is beyond swordfish at this point in time for what she's trying to do. So she's fishing for a biggie fish. And
maybe they know on some level, either that's the only equipment that they have, or maybe they have some knowledge about it.
Yeah. But yeah, just out of the gate, open up with some child endangerment. Give her gloves. She's got a good hat. Yeah. Just give her gloves.
Tech seems less like the kind of clone who would, think through a situation like that, and more like the kind of clone who would quote her the approximate odds of dying. So he, of any of the Bad Batch, would know the specific likelihood mathematically.
This is a bad plan. Like they leave AZ at the bar. Like they take her. So it's problematic. All right. So the main thrust of the story is raiding Count Dooku's war chest, which was nice to see his lair again. I don't know if it's supposed to look like him, but I definitely get those vibes. But who has the right to Count Dooku's war chest, which raises good old spoils of war issues? And Tom, you work for the International Red Cross, and I know that you're not reflecting their opinion on what is a spoil of war, but can you talk us through what is a spoil of war?
Well, it is a great question, and I'm working on a blog post that'll come out this week on it, the week of the January 9th. And it's great to have a legal issue in the title of the first episode of a season of Star Wars, because the term spoil of war is this idea of taken property that is not yours, doesn't belong to your country, to you, but you have some claim to it, or you take it as a result of an armed conflict, of a war. People taking other people's property in war has happened as long as war has existed. That was the reason in many wars that people went to war and fought, was this promise of financial gain and all that came with it. Under the modern suite of IHL, international humanitarian law, or law of armed conflict, some of those concepts are still enshrined. So by that I mean, not every time property is taken that is not yours or doesn't belong to your side isn't unlawful. It's not black and white like that. The law, Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions, do allow certain circumstances where that property can be taken. Namely, it is lawful when the property that's to be taken, whether it's military property, so guns, tanks, bombs, etc., or non-military property, there's a military necessity to it. So there's a reason, there's a tangible military benefit to be gained by seizing this property. You're seeing that every single day, just about, if you're watching the news out of Ukraine. Every time a Russian tank is taken by Ukrainian forces, that's a spoil of war, right? That is lawful. It's lawful for them to take it and to use it. The difference, the line is drawn in the sand broadly. You can get into some more particulars with like prisoners and whatnot, but broadly speaking, between the government and private individuals. So oftentimes it is very illegal to steal or take things from people, just private citizens in the country that you're operating in. So you can't bust down somebody's door and raid their jewelry, do the kinds of things that the Nazis did in World War II, taking sort of precious family cultural heirlooms and whatnot. But you can take government property belonging to the government. There's a lot more leeway in that. What's interesting here, to bring it back to the episode, is that Dooku was a head of state. So he had a leadership role on Sereno. In fact, he left the Jedi Order specifically to go take up the mantle, take his title on Sereno as Count. We don't know a lot about their sort of formal functioning of government, but it's clear that he functions as a sort of head of state. He represented Sereno on the Separatist Council. The other gentleman that the Bad Batch meets, the civilian on world there, refers to Dooku in this way that you would refer to it like a political leader. And he effectively was represented the sovereign during the war. So those assets of his, even though the vast majority of it was probably family assets, you get from that gentleman as well that Dooku likely took a lot of that from his own people. That's property of the state. That is Serenian property, right? And so the Empire or the Republic, then the Empire, was actually perfectly within their rights to come in there and take that property. The Bad Batch is probably a different circumstance. They're not parties to any armed conflict. These are just individuals who are obviously engaging in some level of armed conflict. But as far as the Empire goes, if you consider Dooku and his property to effectively be an arm of Sereno, it's lawful.
So something I was struggling with, because we don't know all the facts,
Right.
was how Dooku as head of state acquired all of that state property, because they're effectively container ships full of jewels and rare items, and as we learned from Romar, that Dooku was it sounded like pillaged his own people.
Mhm.
So problematic right there. So this is, going back to the Nazi example, the Nazis taking art from private individuals or from their victims from death camps doesn't transmute it into state property. Like, we have mechanisms in place to return property from museums that the United States, you know, like took possession of after World War II. That goes back to the family members of who were victims of the Nazis. Here we have another totalitarian state. So I guess the comparable example would be everything that the Soviet Union
Mhm.
took from Nazi Germany that could have been from families, rare art, jewels, everything in that category. So it's like, this is complicated and weird,
Mhm.
because it's one thing if it's just money. It's like, okay, that I see that being from, the state treasury. However, if Dooku was like raiding his own people, and like all those jewels are from families, indigenous people, like there's all kinds of weird, ugly permutations on how he acquired all of that wealth, and an argument that some of it might not be state property, depending on the tracing of its origin, because he wasn't running the model of freedom uh, during the Clone Wars. They built up a war machine. It's called a war chest for a reason. So if they went out and conquered a planet and he took resources from them, no problem. Uh, Again, there are different spins on this. Like, there was like some of the nastiness of the prior president was, like post Gulf War, we should have just taken the oil from, a country that we fought. We didn't do that. It's an un-American thing to go, we'll just pillage resources. Conquering colonial countries did that. We flirted with that during the Theodore Roosevelt and McKinley and Roosevelt administrations, when we played imperialist for a very brief period of history and went like, you know what, this isn't us. That puts aside companies that have done that and staging coups and other nasty things. But generally, as a country, like, that's not us.
Yeah, and
What
I
what
don't know
can
how widely it was known in canon, um, what Sereno, or what the price that the Serenian people paid to have Dooku at the top. And I don't know not that I don't know. I absolutely don't believe for a second that the Empire cared one iota who was the original owner of any of that. Even if it had somebody's name like stenciled on the back. But it is that's an interesting twist on it. Not one that I think you would realistically see the Galactic Empire want to play out to its end.
No, this would be a question for the New Republic.
Yeah.
Like, did they deal with this? Because after the war, did they start going, oh crap, we have all this material dating back to the Clone Wars, and things that property that was taken by the Imperial Navy, Army, the Empire. Like, do they deal with this and trying to repatriate art? Money's a different thing, because you can make restitution.
Mhm.
You can return funds. I mean, it's one thing, like, if we have all these gold coins, like, that's an easy thing to give physically back. If the
Mhm.
gold itself is gone, there could be an accounting to go, this was $9 trillion that would completely rebuild your economy. Here you go. Like, we don't know. But it's an interesting thought exercise. And I don't think we'd ever see this in live action or animated. Book would probably be the best way to explore this.
Yeah.
So, of how do you deal with that? Do they deal with it? So, but with our heroes doing their raid that goes sideways, there's battery of clones. Now, the bright point of our heroes is they use stun, whereas the clone troopers are using fatal shots. The only time that we see our guys using kill shots is in shooting down aircraft. Wrecker, when he starts playing tank with the cannon, he's not directly aiming at clones. He's like shooting sides of hills to bring rebel down on them. So he's not intentionally trying to kill unless it's shooting down an aircraft. Like with the first one that they shoot down, he takes off the wing, but that thing still crashes and explodes. Like, this isn't G.I. Joe where you see them eject in a parachute.
Right.
Like, that pilot's gone. So, but any clone troopers, they just get stunned. But that's still battery.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting distinction, that they're not intentionally killing people.
Yeah, they've only used lethal blaster fire against fellow clones once, to my knowledge, outside of, I can't remember the Order 66 sequence, but there was a scene, let's see here, midway through season 1, where they're trying to escape an airfield and Omega's in danger and Hunter just goes berserk and uses lethal shots there. But fortunately for these poor defendant clones on Sereno, or plaintiff clones, I should say, battery doesn't require like a very high threshold of harm of any type. It's, you need an action, so the pulling of that trigger with the aiming it at one of the clones and a stun blast emitting. The intent from Wrecker or any of the Bad Batch, whoever's shooting, to cause contact, so to hit that clone with a stun blast, and that contact is harmful or offensive, and you don't have to directly contact or touch someone to meet that. There are plenty of case law out there. I remember, I forget the case's name, but like a lunch tray was the offensive contact. The plaintiff and defendant never actually touched, but it was a lunch tray that hit the plaintiff, and that was enough. And so the moment that stun blast hits the clone doesn't want to be stunned. That's maybe on some level harmful, I don't know, but it's certainly offensive. And the clone does indeed suffer that contact. So you've got all the elements of battery met like 100 times in this episode, again and again and again. And it really makes no difference that they're using stun blast from a legal perspective. I think story-wise, it's fascinating. I love that subtle distinction.
Yeah, because they're not killing others.
Right.
And so we're dealing with battery charges as opposed to murder charges multiple times over. So that's also probably they just don't want to go killing their brothers, but we don't see them in other spaces as well where they're not just shooting at clones. Now the crabs were different, but you just, unless it's dealing with aerial combat, they have stun. And I appreciate that. It might be part of that G.I. Joe doctrine, but it's a nice different way to differentiate our heroes from the clone troopers, who are definitely using lethal force in their shots. Now, spaceships make this complicated. Did the Bad Batch commit piracy with their attempted threat of the war chest? And I bring that up because we don't have spaceships that look like cargo containers. At least we're years away from that happening. So like, we had the space shuttle, it had a cargo bay, but it wasn't like a cargo ship coming from Japan full of cars that's then offloaded in Oakland and put onto trains, or bridge pieces coming from China. Like that's shipping. We have planes that haul cargo, but nothing that goes into orbit to move from point A to point B. And I just want to raise what the difference between piracy and air piracy. So piracy, whoever on the high seas commits the crime of piracy as defined by the law of the nations and is afterwards brought into the United States shall be imprisoned for life. And piracy is action on the high seas where you're boarding vessels and taking property from vessels. Aircraft piracy means seizing or exercising control over an aircraft and the special aircraft jurisdiction of the United States by force, violence, threat of force or violence, or any form of intimidation, and with wrongful intent. What did our heroes do? Because it's somewhere in between with a cargo spaceship.
Yeah, Star Wars kind of mixes the space is the ocean, even though oceans exist in Star Wars. So you'd probably, if this were on the books in the code of Galactic Republic or Imperial laws, you'd probably see a blend of these two laws, just by virtue of how how commerce operates, how individuals operate and travel in an interplanetary nature. I think they haven't committed the strict definition of piracy on the high seas because they're not on the high seas. They're not in international waters. My point in the blending would be, are they in an area of space or atmosphere that counts the same as high seas? High seas is a sort of a technical term. There's a legal implication to that. High seas is different than territorial waters or some other distance-based location on the ocean. And so I think it matters that they're close to the landing strip. They're in Atmo, so to speak, on Sereno when they do this. But they've certainly committed aircraft piracy. I mean, they go aboard one of these Class 4 container ships with force. They seize it or attempt to seize it. Stun blast, it qualifies as force and some level of violence, and they have the wrongful intent of trying to steal the booty, the Dooku's booty on the ship. They're stealing Dooku's booty, and that's their intent.
Yeah, it's
I had to work that in here somewhere. I failed to do that in the spoils of war portion.
well, it's Dooku is played by Sir Christopher Lee. That's England's booty right there.
That's true.
And
this is true.
We will respect it. So pulling up further definitions, and this is from the post that I did on Star Wars Resistance dealing with piracy. And the high seas are defined as open waters of sea or ocean as distinguished from ports and havens and waters within narrow headlands on a coast. Pulling in international law, the Convention of High Seas states that piracy includes any illegal act of violence, detention, or any act of deprivation committed for private ends by the crew or passengers of a private ship or private aircraft and directed. So they're still on liftoff. Like they haven't crossed Atmo yet. So they're not in space. And there's all the lines from The Martian about, international, law of the sea applies in space. And you're a pirate for boarding another spaceship. So there's all that legal jargon that deserves analysis in its own right to explain how that works. But boy, howdy, this gets weird fast. with what did they commit, other than Wrecker needs to not pull the trigger all the time. Uh, is my hope for smoother operations, because they probably would have actually escaped with some material of value, and all of that this mission was a loss. There was like no intel gained, there was nothing. It exposed them as being alive. So like this is a colossal mission failure, because of like they're back on the Ramparts radar now. So it's a really, it was, and they got nothing for it. If they got a few $billions, and it's like, we are done. We're getting the hell out of here, and we're gonna live far, far away, and no one's ever gonna hear of us again. That's a victory, but they blow it because Wrecker's trigger happy.
Not even a pocket, not even a helmet full of jewels or credits. Can't even pay for the
No,
gas to get there.
no, it's like, and why did Omega have an open backpack? Like, it's just zip that thing up and put it on, and it's like, there you go. Now we are introduced to Romar, who is an older gentleman living off the grid. Clearly might even be a displaced person or refugee. It's hard to say which, but clearly has suffered because of the war. And they kidnap him. Kidnapping is every person who forcibly or by other means of instilling fear steals or takes or holds, detains or arrests any person in the state and carries the person to another country, state, or county, or any part of the same county is guilty as kidnapping. They force him back to his own place with them. Kidnapping. Possible false imprisonment with keeping them there, but that quickly dissipates as, I don't know if it's Stockholm syndrome or as they explain themselves for what they're trying to do. And Tech fixes his storage device that has all the cultural important information for that planet. But yeah, this is kind of problematic for them.
Yeah, yet another instance where their identity, their whereabouts, that's like very critical information to them, who they are, and it's getting out intimately into the hands of somebody else, just sort of unnecessarily. And the thing about kidnapping, you can be kidnapped, you could be falsely imprisoned in your home. Like, it doesn't require the act of kidnapping, the crime of kidnapping doesn't require you to be moved far away or taken into some, dark, dreary place, movie style. It requires very little in the way of movement. And so even a few steps could be, a few steps, you being moved from point A to point B can be enough. The fact that they moved him back to his own house, that's really irrelevant. That's the movement that counts. And he didn't want to go there, certainly not under their control. This might be like a case of immediate onset Stockholm syndrome. It's like, you fix my one little thing, and like, you guys are friends now, and let's just open up about everything. But
Yeah, they might
it
have
works.
realized it's very Star Wars, and
Yeah,
because the Bad Batch is under a lot of pressure at the moment when they meet. They're being shot at, they've just crashed, Tech has a broken leg, like there's all kinds of bad that's happening. So they might not have made the smartest decision because they're still in freak out mode for, I don't want to get shot by anybody. So maybe that's at play. But going like, dude, this is an old man that it's like you took him back to his house. Like, this is problematic. The fact that he quickly realizes what they are.
yeah.
And they realize what he is. And it's not like they went like, they didn't do a roadside execution of the guy. So like, good. And being Star Wars, he does help rescue Omega. So
This is true.
he didn't have a legal obligation to do that. There's no
Yeah.
duty to rescue. He saved her because he's a good person who now just wants to not get shot by Imperials. So I don't know if the Imperials will go back and do a sweep to try to round people up, or if he's
Yeah,
going to move.
Yeah, the comment Romar alluded to, I don't know, people fleeing or being forcibly displaced. I'd have to go back and see the actual dialogue to be sure, but he's one of the few holdouts, it seems, on Sereno. So it's very curious what happened to everyone else. Like where are these folks? Because this wasn't exactly like a poor world, where yeah, things would have turned upside down for them when the war started. Sereno was protected, it was safe. And so yeah, that's a curiosity.
Yeah, it's during the American Civil War, Washington, D.C. was the most fortified city on the planet. If the Union had lost Gettysburg and Lee's army had marched on DC, they would have been obliterated at DC and the war would have been over that day because the Confederate army would be dead. So Sereno is in that category of this is the capital city. It is well fortified. And if they had, when was the orbital bombardment? Was it after Dooku's death? Was it after Order 66 that the new empire just goes in and obliterates the capital city just cuz? That's pretty twisted. Also sounds like Palpatine's just trying to get rid of any loose ends that could show a connection with Dooku. But at that point, they didn't blow up the Capitol building. So again, this just seems more like a revenge bombing, Dresden-esque, for we're not going to target the palace. So again, just weird, just very weird. I don't know what to make of it. Any other thoughts? Oh, well, murder of Wilco.
Yeah, poor clone. It's dangerous to be a clone with a conscience in the Galactic Empire.
Yeah, they you know that there's going to be problems for people who are Army of the Republic, there to defend the Republic and what they believed in the Republic, now part of an empire. Like that's a hard switch. There were German naval officers during World War II who were in that category. Like the German Navy was the only military branch that did not dismiss its Jewish officers, which would have been complicated if you'd been a Jewish officer in Kriegsmarine. But there's like Battleship Bismarck, one of my historical interests. I have the book that Ballard did when they found it. The captain of the Bismarck gave Hitler the regular salute, not the arm out, when Hitler came aboard to inspect Bismarck, because he was old school Navy, not Nazi Navy. And whereas the admiral who was on board was very much in the Nazi Navy. So there's the Imperial at this point of Star Wars lore probably has that similar mix. You know, there could be human officers who are, wait a minute, we're taking a hard turn here.
Yeah. Well, and I think this sets up an interesting arc for Rampart. Like, just to be clear on the legal front, it's murder, right? Like there's no gray area there. There's nothing in military law that allows an officer to execute a soldier for not following orders. Not in this context.
And
Not in this context.
an illegal
an
order
illegal
to
order at that. Right.
falsify a report.
Yeah. In fact, it's worth it. It bears mentioning that Rampart had a duty to not follow an illegal order, like that soldiers carry a duty to distinguish between the two and have no legal obligation to follow any legal order. And in fact, it's imperative for them to not follow them as well. So in any event, he did the right thing, but paid the ultimate price for it. That was like kind of a like starkly disturbing scene, just his body kind of silently falling off the cliff there. And he had, throughout his chase of the clone of the Bad Batch in the episode, he was very competent. Like, I mean, I love all the clones, but he sort of set himself apart. He was tactically proficient, sort of put things together very quickly, and sort of doggedly pursued the Bad Batch until they were finally able to escape. I mean, they cut it really close, escaping with their lives, and just a broken leg in the mix. So, and that was all thanks to Wilco's efforts. So it sets Rampart on an interesting arc. Where does he go from here? He's clearly very ambitious and motivated, doesn't want to step on the wrong side of Tarkin, knows what that would bring him. Where does he go from here? He's willing to kill to keep his record clean, so to speak.
Yeah, and Tarkin's not above blowing up Scarif base full of Imperials to prove a point.
Right.
So is that the culture of the officer corps, that admirals are happy to shoot people?
Yeah.
That's a bad military to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, Tarkin, I mean, I think about Tarkin's whole like mantra is built on brutality. There was that scene, I think it was in the first season of Rebels, where he has those two Imperials executed on Lothal. Maybe it was the second season. He just shows up and the Grand Inquisitor kills him right there in the office. So, yeah, I think Rampart probably knows that, probably has witnessed some atrocity committed by Tarkin, and doesn't hesitate to commit them himself to keep himself on track, so to speak.
But there's a difference, and this doesn't make it better.
No.
Both are bad. Tarkin in Rebels is killing people he finds to be incompetent. There can at least be a HR reason for other officers to go, we will not screw up, because
Right.
that's how you get killed. Moff Gideon is in that category as well, with shooting someone who interrupts him. Rampart's different because he just shoots a dude to cover up a fact.
Yeah.
That's very different behavior than we've seen by other Imperials who just kill others left and right in their chain of command. Not good, all bad, but Rampart is different than behavior we've seen before, because this is just malice and a CYA maneuver. So very, very different. That said, here we are. So
Good start to the season, though.
Very great start to the season. It's good to see AZ floating around, so happy about that. And yeah, like when we got Wanda Sykes, so where's that gonna go? So
Yeah.
fun stuff.
Yeah.
So any other closing thoughts?
No, I'm already ready for Wednesday. I'm gonna finish up my blog post and count down the hours.
Awesome. Look forward to seeing it. And until then, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Happy New Year. 23 is off to a running start. If you're listening to us on any player where you can leave a review, please do so. We appreciate that. And stay healthy, stay safe, and stay geeky. Take care, all.